Welcome to the RxM blog. In this installment, we're going to be talking to Clyde Seepersad from the Linux Foundation about high-tech training and certification. Clyde, welcome, and thanks for joining us and taking the time.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
All right. So maybe we could start by just having you kind of give us an overview of your role in the Linux Foundation.
The team that I head up is training and certification, which is a group that we put together about 5 years ago, once we realized that the quality of the code was getting ahead of the availability of talent. And so part of the shift into the open source model is that without dominant commercial companies, there has tended to be a gap opening up at the entry level for skills and awareness on open source projects. And so that's really what my team here at the LF looks after, is trying to stay in sync and ensure that entry-level training and or certification exams are available for these technologies as they achieve kind of critical mass.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's been very interesting over the past couple of decades to see the transition from commercial solutions as the way people deploy things on platforms to the kind of the whole platform moving into the open source space. And I would imagine that gap you're talking about addressing, it was pretty profound there for a while, and there weren't a lot of good solutions.
True. I think it is interesting that for longer than you'd think, the mythology persisted that open source was something that you're supposed to figure out on your own, and that it was somehow an epic declaration of weakness to look for training solutions. And that, I think, has finally, the dam has broken on that, and people realize that it's software, just like any other software, and the most efficient way to become productive is to learn it in a well-structured way.
Yeah, and it's really also, I think, interesting. When you've got a commercial entity behind a product, they've got expertise and a vested interest in developing their own training solutions. But when you're in the open source space, especially in the earlier days where there wasn't as much corporate backing for engineers to go out and do these projects, many of them were, it was on their spare time or was part of an academic type of endeavor. And, there was no funding for it. And so it's really kind of nice to see outfits like yours, step in and fill that gap.
We give a lot of credit to the community. We've had just a huge amount of support from a cross-section of people in every community where we have developed training materials, and in particular our certification exams. And RxM has contributed to several of those. But it definitely has not been a solo effort. The same can-do, roll-up-your-sleeve spirit that we see on the code development side has been very much in evidence on the training and certification side. So there's been a lot of community goodwill and support to get these programs put together.
Yeah. A lot of people I find are not completely aware of the sort of the relationship between like the Linux Foundation and some of the other nested foundations under the mothership. Clearly we at RxM are big fans of the CNCF, for example. Can you kind of walk us through the relationship and how particularly the training and certification that you're responsible for fits in with the cloud native side of the world?
Sure. I pick your analogy here, but one analogy that you could use is we provide a certain level of federated services at the LF, and the projects have a lot of their own governance and processes and are independent states that run on their own. My group is one of the federated service groups that provides training and certification services across the different portfolios, so including CNCF, Hyperledger, and others. Because what we found is that there are certain types of activities. Training is one. Our events management service is another, where it makes sense to have one center of excellence, if you will, that is scalable to provide solutions that can then be tapped into by the different umbrella projects. And it really is the most efficient way of operating, and training falls into that category. So think of us, and my group, as really a general contractor at the LF level, and we have dialogue with the individual projects, AGL for automotive or LFN for networking, to say, how can we help, right? Where are the gaps on training or certification that you're feeling pain points on that we can then bring kind of our centralized skills to bear, work within the communities and put together those programs.
Gotcha. So kind of economies of scale, centralizing it. Yeah. Great. So what makes you personally passionate about this space, training and certification, and how does it all fit into your personal experience?
Yeah, I've been doing online education for over 15 years now, and it was clear when I started that education was going to shift towards more of an online basis. And you see that having happened all the way through from the K-12 system to the college system. And now you're very much seeing it in the non-degree post-secondary system. And it parallels what we've seen in the rest of the real world, right? Which is that the internet has broken down barriers and made things a lot more accessible and affordable. And you've been able to grow communities much bigger than you would have been able to in the past. And when it comes to training and certifications and skills building, it really is real just-in-time, high-quality training solutions that are manageable in size, so it's not a 2-year degree commitment. That's really what people expect now, right? The skills in technology and in a lot of other industries, they're turning over so quickly that you really need to focus on what's the just-in-time skills, right? What are the relatively small, digestible units of education that can help propel somebody's career forward? Because in many cases now, things just move too fast to rely on a degree-driven model of building skill.
Yeah. That's interesting, that whole thread, because one of the things that we see is that there used to be solutions that were sort of all stitched together where, you would use these things, and now in the open source space, there are some kind of anchors that fit into certain places, like maybe, OpenStack or Kubernetes or something like that. But the things that you could integrate with them from a plugin standpoint, or, the auxiliary facilities like monitoring and networking and things like that, it's kind of vast, right? And so you can't really cover anything end to end and have it be a good fit for any particular party. It has to be like it really does need to be like an a la carte type of thing, huh?
Exactly. I can't tell you how many requests I've had to develop a cloud exam. And I say to them, well, it's sort of like a cloud. Like if you start to grasp for it, there's nothing there. You have to get very, very specific, what pipelines you want to use, it's just, the mix and match, like you say, really has become critical. And so I think this idea of everybody's ecosystem is going to be architected to make sense for their individual company or industry. What we need to do is make sure that if you're using Kubernetes, if you're using Hyperledger Fabric for your blockchain, that those technical components you're able to access training material for, so that you can then be productive and efficient in terms of how you plug it into the broader architecture without us having to predefine what that architecture might look like.
Right. So tell me about the whole Linux Foundation evolution in this training, because the Linux Foundation existed for quite a while before they developed this whole training thing. How long has training been a thing there?
Well, training has been an official department for a little over 5 years now. We have been delivering training courses for much longer than that. And as is probably typical in some of these cases, we kind of got into it accidentally, right? Big member companies reached out and said, hey, we really need you to send a kernel person to come work with our folks, or a device driver person. And that morphed into the first wave, which was a very much of an instructor-led training business.
And when was that?
So that would have started in the mid to late 2000s.
Okay.
And so there was a small, fairly ad hoc business for several years. And then in 2013, we really took a look at it and said, there's a much bigger agenda at play here. That's not just about specific needs for on-site instruction. There's a bigger canvas of just fundamental skills building And that was when this group got pulled together to say, hey, there's much more here, right? There's the canvas of things that we do now, right? Putting out free courses, putting out certification exams, doing a lot of e-learning. That change of gears happened in 2013.
Gotcha. And when did the certification piece kind of show up? Was that hand in hand, or?
It was. It was the very first thing we started working on when this team got pulled together, and we launched it at the Open Source Summit in summer of 2014. And that was our first 2 exams, which were Linux-based exams.
Gotcha. And the CNCF ones have been around for about a year and a half now?
About a year and a half, yes.
Gotcha. And like contrasting the two, the CKA and the CKAD, have they been pretty successful? What's the growth been like on the CNCF side of the fence?
It's been really impressive. I think we've all seen the charts about adoption rates and how fast Kubernetes has been adopted relative to other technologies. And both exams have followed the trajectory, which we've now seen as pretty common across the multiple industries. We have over a half a dozen of these exams, which is that the exam goes live and there's a bit of a cooling off period where people figure out what exactly it is. And then 3 to 6 months later, the demand starts to ramp and really goes up. And we've definitely seen that happen. The CKA exam came out first. The CKAD exam followed about 9 months later. And so they're on slightly different parts of the curve as they go. But the demand for them has been really, really impressive and very much global and multi-industry in nature. And so in that way, they parallel our initial exams on Linux, which were also very global and multi-industry in terms of the uptake. But we're definitely getting a lot of requests from around the world, including requests for multiple languages. The exams already support multiple languages within the console.
Oh, wow.
So that people can read the questions in their native language. But it's been very, very. It's been a really pleasant feeling to see that it is scratched an itch that was obviously sitting beneath the surface there to help on-ramp this next generation of technologists into a Kubernetes world.
Yeah, well, the adoption of Kubernetes has just been breathtaking. And so it's not too surprising, I guess, that would follow. One of the things also I wanted to ask you about is the whole certification thing. There's there's 2 edges to that sword, I think, on the certification front. There's all the the commercial certifications that you've had throughout the years, and there's kind of a stigma around certifications in some circles, like, oh, that person's a paper, insert your favorite job discipline, because they passed the test, but they don't really know what they're doing. How do you guys think about that, and how have you battled that in your own, kind of approach to certification?
Good question. We heard those things and were aware of those perspectives at the outset. And so from the get-go, starting with our very first exam, we have focused almost exclusively on what are called performance-based exams. And what I mean by that is it is not a paper test. You do every exam we have, the candidate has a live environment, and then they have a series of tasks that they have to conduct on that live environment. And so if you think of the sort of mini programming exercises that folks who are interviewing candidates have always traditionally done, think of that on steroids. So our exams are all about live systems, live requests for you to work on particular tasks. So that at the end of it, if you can achieve a passing score, running a live system during a timed exercise under the stress of being proctored by a live human proctor who is looking at your webcam and looking at your screen share and listening to your mic, that's a pretty good proxy for some of the pressures of being in a work environment. And we've had really good success and really have been gratified by the feedback from the users, from the candidates, from the employers who hire those candidates, that this next generation of performance-based tests that we were able to get onto the front end of has really restored their belief in the value of certification, because it's not about picking an answer out of a lineup that you pull down from a test cheat prep site the night before, right? It is very much about being able to do the work hands-on. And I think some things that weren't possible, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that are possible now in terms of delivering these types of rich candidate experiences via our browser have really made it possible to address a lot of those historical concerns.
Yeah, well, and I know, having taken the CKA myself, I mean, you've essentially taken the paper out of it. It's all practical, and it's really, it's pretty impressive. I was very impressed with, the logistics you guys are managing behind the scenes, because, for one test, like OpenStack or Kubernetes, you've got multiple clusters of systems set up that, people are interacting with. And as you mentioned, the browser portal, that's a really big deal. And, so yeah, a lot of this stuff probably would have been incredibly difficult or impossible to do in days gone by.
I appreciate the feedback. And that speaks to why it makes sense for this group to exist centrally, right? It would really, it would be very painful if every individual project had to go about figuring out how to do this and experience the learning pains. It's a vastly more efficient process now than it was 6 years ago when we built our first one.
Yeah, well, we've been really impressed over here. Now, it's also kind of interesting where all of these, MOOCs and, online training, for example, we've seen training go from exclusively classroom, I don't want to date myself, but a long time ago, to, starting to show up a little bit online, with some of the early products, and, and you always had self-study, I guess, but that was sort of tough with computers. And then as cloud and virtualization stuff starts showing up, that becomes a little bit easier. Nowadays, you've got, a completely transformed kind of environment. How do you guys interact with the whole online experience and some of the platforms that are out there?
Yeah, so we've, as you referenced here, we do a lot of courses for free on the edX.org platform. And that is very much part of just kind of the mission of LF as a nonprofit to say, hey, let's cast the doors wide open so that it's not a function of, did you have a credit card to pay? And it's not a function of which country are you in that you can get to a center where the curriculum is being delivered. We're big believers in using the power that the internet brings to really disperse the knowledge broadly. And so if there's one thing that we have consistent across our portfolio is we try to put a free course on edX on the foundations of these projects together wherever possible. So even if we don't have paid training or cases where we don't have certifications, the one common effect is trying to get those courses out onto edX to at least create awareness and baseline awareness of what these projects are and what they accomplish and how you compare and contrast with other technologies. And then we will build on that. From there, we have a portfolio of self-paced e-learnings, the ability to deliver courses online and spin up lab environments where you could practice hands-on. We're big believers in developing hands-on skills. So we're very focused on small units of learning followed by very hands-on practice on labs, because ultimately that's what it's all about in software, right? Is exactly having the hands-on skills to do the work. And not coincidentally, that's what the exams test. Can you do the work? Can you manipulate these systems? Can you, write apps, develop code, etc.?
As I understand it, the free online solutions you guys have been offering have been pretty widely successful.
It's been amazing. We've had over 1.25 million people register for our courses from over 220 countries.
Wow.
It really is. It is a remarkable testament to the reach of the internet.
So you guys have done a bunch of different stuff over the years, different types of courses, different programs. Have you ever done any flops? Anything that you've built where it just didn't work, or anything where you had to say, we have to change our strategy in the whole way that we're thinking about training, or maybe this project is just not something that people are going to want to ingest training on?
Yeah, I won't call them out by name, but we have had, we get the programs out and then we listen to the feedback from the market. And so we have withdrawn products from the market at times. And that's just the nature of open source, right? We're trying to stay very close to the edge of the adoption curve so that if projects do catch fire, we don't have a lag on creating talent. And one of the downsides of doing that is that sometimes you follow something that's right over the edge if it doesn't if it doesn't end up catching fire, and that's okay, right? It takes 1,000 flowers to bloom to let the market sort of suss out which ones are going to win in the end. We love all our projects equally, so my group tries to support the projects in as much as possible to try to help ensure that they can achieve that successful adoption.
Right. And as you've gone through this whole experience of, piloting things, developing them, watching them mature, have you seen any come full cycle where, this project served a purpose for this decade and, now it's time for things to move on to the next thing?
Yeah, we've definitely had a couple that have been retired because the technology stack is changing. And which is a good thing. I think the velocity of open source development and the types of tools that we have, there's tools that we have now that you couldn't really even envision 5 years ago, sometimes even 3 years ago. If you think of things like container orchestration, it's just pretty breathtaking. And for us, the job is done when there is not a shortage of talent, right? If there's enough talent to support how technology is being utilized, or if the stack is moving on to a different set of technologies, we measure success by saying, are the technologies that people need to implement today accessible and available for training, so that the lack of availability of human talent is not a bottleneck.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, just the evolution of humanity and the speed of technology and how the staying power of technology. If you were navigating in the 1800s, you needed a good timepiece and a sextant, and you were good to go.
Right.
And it would last you the rest of your life, and you wouldn't need to learn anything new. Nowadays, internally here at RXM, we're always talking about continuous learning, and because you just can't stop. You've got to continue to learn all the time. So
exactly. And that's one of the big changes, I think, industry-wide that has happened is in the old model, people used to take, for instance, a certification exam, and then they would renew that continually over a 10, 20-year cycle. What we're seeing much more of now is people building up these lifetime portfolios of different certifications based on the technologies as they evolve. And so it's less about earning and keeping a cert over a multi-cycle period, and more about using that as a springboard for what's next.
Right. It's showing that you can adapt and continue learning. Right. I think that's really, really important. Well, are there any secrets that you guys have discovered about, doing training and certification? Any, things you can, share with the community about, great ways to stay on top of new technologies or anything like that?
Well, I think this idea, we've been really pleasantly surprised by the adoption on edX and the ability to put courses out for free on these platforms and really invite large numbers of people to come in and participate. One of the things that we were surprised by initially was the extent to which people self-organize in those communities. Because we had initially spent a lot of time thinking about how do you support these big online communities with hundreds of thousands of users, when you think about time zones, when you think about languages. And actually it turns out you don't really have to spend a lot of time worrying about it, because the communities self-organize in many ways and will support each other, and in many ways bubble over the same type of joint investment and community mindedness that we have always seen on the code development side.
It's an interesting analog to the monolithic being decomposed into microservices and sort of managing themselves, right?
There you
go. Well, Clyde, thank you so much for taking a chunk of your day out to chat with us. It was really great, getting your insights, and best of luck with the certifications and training programs in the road ahead.
Thanks for having me. Hopefully your listeners and viewers find it useful. We always love spreading the word of the mission to get training and certification into the hands of people who need it.
All right. We're brothers in arms there. Thanks, Clyde. Take care.
Thanks, Randy. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.